Welcome to Music Matters 2020. We're broadcasting live today from Founders Park in historic Ocean Grove, New Jersey at the Jersey Shore. And thank you for joining our unique podcast community where we take you behind the curtain and we explore issues in the performing arts today as seen through the eyes of distinguished colleagues. We pull back that curtain and you join the conversation. Be sure to find the chat feature on your screen and chat in some questions as you join the conversation. The more you join in, the better we feel. Thank you so much for being here today. Remember to hit subscribe below the video screen and hit that bell to get the most up-to-date information on upcoming guests and topics for the episodes to come. Thank you so much for being here today. In this era of COVID-19 and the pandemic and quarantine, artists have had to get very creative in their approaches to meeting their craft. Creative artists being creative people naturally, we've had to not only be creative within our field, we've had to be creative across the lines that divide us and in meeting the demands of our community, whether it be choruses, orchestras, composers. All of us are in that same giant boat as we grapple with the issues that's being faced today. So thank you for joining us today as we explore these topics. Our guest for today's episode is a wonderful composer calling in from the Austin, Texas area and is highly published in the most important publishers in the country in choral music and piano music. And his name is Brad Nix. So welcome, Brad, and thank you for joining Music Matters 2020.
Thank you, Jason. It's a pleasure to be here. This is a wonderful thing that you're doing to kind of connect folks. And I'm glad to come in and be a part of it.
Well, you're the second guest from the Lone Star State, so we're delighted to have you here today to discuss your unique journey as an artist and to talk about your music, which has inspired so many. We're delighted that you can join us today, and I look forward to hearing your story.
Thank you, Jason.
So let's start with your journey as an artist. Tell us how you came to find composition, and tell us what makes you unique and how you've come to your path.
Well, boy, that's a long story for me, and I'll try to be brief, but it's been a lot of twists and turns along the way. I knew from an early age that I wanted to be involved in music. I think a lot of musicians probably are that way. We sense our calling and know that we're going to be in the world of art, whatever form that might take, in my case, music. And I think we know that early on. We might not always know exactly how that's going to play out as our careers develop and as our lives take place. I started out really wanting to be a jazz pianist. To be honest, I have quite a jazz, well, not quite, but a bit of a jazz piano background. When I was in high school, I thought, okay, what I'm going to do is graduate from high school, go to college, get a jazz performance degree, going to move to the Village there in New York, and that's going to be what I do. And so I always had this creative aspect to my life. I was a good improviser at the piano. As I said, I enjoyed playing jazz in high school. I went to college and started as a jazz major, and I had some wonderful teachers. And one of my teachers, a guy named Dr. Jeff Hayden, who's still teaching at Georgia State University, where I did my undergrad, he said, you can learn all you need to know about jazz by getting out there with the guys and playing it, but this really is the time in your life that you develop a classical technique. You're here with good teachers, you're here in a good school, let's see how far you can go. And he kind of convinced me, and I switched over from jazz performance to piano performance. And it didn't take long before I thought, yes, this is what I want to do. I want to develop my classical chops. I want to maybe find a university to teach, perform concerts as much as I'm able to, go and finish up my master's and my DMA in piano performance, because with piano performance, you've got nothing else to do but go ahead and finish the thing. Just one degree usually isn't enough to get the job done. And so that was the plan, and I jumped into it and loved it. And it wasn't too far into that plan when I kind of hit a bump in the road. I was starting my master's degree and doing piano contests and practicing the obligatory 6 hours a day that pianists practice. And I started coming down with a very severe right hand issue, right in the center of my wrist. And it wasn't carpal tunnel. I was tested and x-rayed and nothing like that, but it was a strain. It was some kind of muscle pull that no one could quite identify. And the truth of the matter is, it made my 20s absolutely miserable, to be honest. I suffered through my master's degree. Dr. Hayden was a wonderful teacher and coach, and helped me to get through it. I flew out to the University of Colorado at Boulder, where I did my doctorate degree, and auditioned there and got through the audition. And I didn't tell anyone there that I was injured. I was afraid that if I told my teachers there that, hey, you're bringing in someone that is injured, they might have thought twice about giving me an assistantship or accepting me at all into the program. And so I was a little bit devious there, unfortunately, in keeping my injury from them until I moved to Boulder, and I knew that, okay, they can't throw me out now, I'm here. And I suspect that probably a lot of musicians, maybe not so much now as in years past, because performing disorders are becoming more and more talked about and prominent, but I've heard stories about how symphony players and others have often kept their maladies hidden.
They still do. I mean,
afraid.
I've heard a lot of rumors of Metropolitan Opera string players who have tendinitis
Right.
issues. They just mask it and hide it because of their in career. Yeah, no, so it's very important.
That's right. That's exactly right. And so I was kind of under that umbrella. And when I came to Colorado, I had some wonderful teachers there as well, and I am definitely a man of faith, and I spent much time praying to the Lord, asking, what is this? What do I do with this? Are you trying to tell me something? Am I going to, when you love something as much as we performing artists love what we do, whether we're singers or whether we're pianist or violinist or whatever, when you love something that passionately, and then all of a sudden you're faced with the prospect of a life without it, it really is devastating. And nowadays there are doctors that I think, as I mentioned earlier, that are a little bit more open to dealing with this. But I remember going to several hand doctors and just hoping against hope that they could give me some kind of good news and relief, and they would say, hey, it's just your wrist, take an Advil, you're going to be fine. And to someone that has spent hours playing the piano all day, and now you're reduced to 5 minutes at the piano a day, it can be devastating. But I had wonderful teachers, and when at Colorado, and when I told them of my issue, they helped me, and the Lord really kind of used some great teachers to kind of help diagnose and back me out of that hand injury. Now, I say all that to say this, that when I moved to Colorado and I was really in the thick of dealing with this hand injury and trying to figure out a way that I could play again, I was directing a church choir there at East Boulder Baptist Church in Boulder, Colorado. And I was directing the choir, and I started writing a few things for them. And I don't know at that point if I really thought writing could be an alternative career if this piano thing doesn't work out. I don't think that was quite it. But it was just a way for me to stay involved in music. And I'd always, although I'd never thought of myself as a composer at all, I had often, I was creative in music. And it was a way that my creativity could come out. And I discovered that I really liked it. And so, as it turns out, I was helped out of my injury, and I no longer hurt today, thank the Lord. I play as much as I want, and I'm just fine. But when I did get out of the injury, I had kind of been bitten by the writing bug, and it had become my focus, and that's where it all started. And I said earlier that I'm a man of faith, and I am, and I tend to look for spiritual reasons behind things that happen to me, and I think part of the issue of the piano playing kind of being thwarted by my hand issue was that it was the Lord's way of probably taking me off a path I was on that maybe I wanted, but I wasn't maybe cut out for, and directing me to something that I was cut out for. I was a good pianist and practiced hard, but you know, to really make it in a performing arts world as well, you come into contact with these folks all the time. That's a level of talent and a level of commitment that I'm not sure I possessed. It's pretty rare air that these folks breathe, and I'm afraid had I continued on that path, it might have led to more disappointments than failures. And then the other thing that I think probably happened is I had, and this is a lesson that I learn every day as a believer, as a Christian, as a composer. I am when I jump into something, Jason, I'm there all the way, body, mind, heart, spirit, soul. And it's very easy for me to let whatever my passion is become the thing that I build my entire life around. And I had decided that I'm going to be a pianist, and that's my goal. That's my God with a little g, if I can kind of describe it that way. And as believers, I think that when we get our priorities out of whack, God has a way
Oh,
of
I
kind of
think
straightening them
we've
back
all
out.
felt that as
And
artists. I know for me it was I wanted to be an opera
yes,
singer in college and
yeah,
going into grad school and conducting never really I never really considered it until I was in my master's degree, and a conductor mentor said to me, "You're not going to be an opera singer. You don't have voice isn't big enough, but you'd be a really great conductor." And once I
there
processed
you
the
go.
shock and I went a different direction, the Lord opened up doors I never thought were imaginably. So hearing your story is quite warming, and it reminds me so much of I think what a lot of us go through in the professional field.
I think I think that's absolutely not an unusual story. So I think he was kind of teaching me that whatever you do, you have to keep me first and get your priorities right. I did go on and teach collegiately. I taught at Sterling College, which is a wonderful college in Kansas. I don't know if you've heard of Sterling. The people there, it's in the town of Sterling. And the joke when I came, we would travel around the country, and people would always ask, "Where's Sterling College?" And the joke would always be, "Well, it's on the Staple." And what they meant by that is you open up the U.S. Atlas, and right there in the center of the Atlas is the staple, put it all together, and that's about where Sterling is. And I taught piano. You know how it is at a small college. You wear a lot of different hats. So I did teach piano, but I also taught theory and orchestration and composition and whatever else was needed. And I was there for 8 years. And from that point, I was publishing more and more. I was writing more and more. I was kind of having my heart turned toward the industry, maybe a little bit more, and the publishing industry, that is. And I finally an opportunity came open with Hal Leonard, and I just felt, gosh, this is it. Let's take it, and I
How
did.
exciting! How God
And
rewards those journeys, those leaps of faith, and you step on that water, and you never know where your path's going to lead you, and here we are today.
Well, that's right. Of course, I have to admit that in the time of COVID-19, when choirs aren't singing anymore, that I have looked back and thought, boy, that really was a leap of faith, because we're kind of in a mess right now. But I have no doubt that we're going to get through it, and that things are going to work out. So that's a long answer to a very short question, but that's how I kind of came to the point
So
where
tell
I
me how
am
many
today.
pieces are in your catalog? Do you write for piano? What do you write for? Tell us about your depth. I know you do lots of choir arrangements, mostly sacred, but tell me about your oeuvre.
Sure. Yes, my writing is primarily in the sacred choral market. I really write for a lot of different levels. Probably the majority of the music that I've written for have been to satisfy the needs and the demands of small to mid-sized choirs. I really also have a great interest in writing and stretching out a little bit artistically and providing material for more collegiate, or certainly at the very advanced high school choirs. I think that you started off this podcast with Talia Miracula, which is one of the new pieces that I have out, and that's certainly for choirs that are a little bit more advanced.
Stunning music. I hope
And
everyone takes a look at that piece. That should be on everyone's program next year.
well, thank you for that, Jason. It was a pleasure to write it. I had a wonderful lyricist with that. Pamela Stewart wrote the lyrics and the translation into Latin, and did a wonderful job. But it's primarily choral, sacred music. I have some secular pieces as well, and I'm interested in expanding that part of my oeuvre. I do have several piano books that are in print. I haven't although I'm a pianist, I have not been able to write as much piano music maybe as you might think, because I've been so involved in choral. The other part of me that I absolutely love is orchestration. It's odd. I spend most of my time writing choral music, but if you were to turn on my iPhone and check out what I'm listening to, it's primarily orchestral. And I am a huge Mahler
Oh, me
fanatic.
too.
Huge,
Wonderful.
really. I mean, I remember when I was in college, I didn't know Mahler from a hole in the ground. And in a music history class, someone played Mahler, and it was the very first movement of Mahler 4, right when those sleigh bells come in. Dooey dooey dup dup, dooey dooey dup dup. And it just captivated me. And then when I moved to Boulder, Colorado, the University of Colorado in the city of Boulder, they have an event every summer. It's probably been canceled this summer, but they usually have an event called Colorado Mahler Fest. And so every summer they bring in Mahler scholar. Oh, it's just wonderful. You just immerse yourself in it. So I chased a bunny trail there, but I'm very interested in orchestral music and in orchestration, and I've not written anything at all which stands alone as an orchestration in and of itself, a symphonic piece. But I've been very involved in orchestrating anthems for larger church choirs that might have an orchestra at their disposal.
We have a question from New York City. From Eve from New York City asks, how do you find inspiration to write new pieces?
Well, Eve, a lot of that. It's funny. I was teaching a seminar, which Jason, we can talk about a little bit later. It's called the Composer Symposium, which is sponsored by a very good friend of mine. In fact, my best friend, Joseph Martin, and we can talk about that in a bit. But one of the topics that I just finished lecturing about 2 days ago was creativity. And I think that the old adage that we're always taught, garbage in, garbage out, or maybe your mother told you you are what you eat. I think a lot of that has to do, or a lot of it is true, rather, in our creative process. And as much time taking in what at least I consider to be good art, what nourishes me, what inspires me. I take in as much of that as possible, and I love poetry. I get a lot of inspiration from poetry. I'm in my little writing studio right now, but right in front of me is a whole book are full of nothing but poetry books. So I read poetry a little bit every day. I love good films. I love cinema. I love architecture. I love art. I love drawing. I love photography. I love all sorts of types of music. I live in Texas, and I guarantee that you wouldn't believe this. I'm probably the only sacred choral music composer in the world that, at least when we're not under quarantine from a pandemic, I put on a cowboy hat and go two-stepping in Texas dance halls to Western swing. I love it all. And I think that being exposed to as much good art, and of course that's a subjective term because what you consider good might not, be what I like, but maybe I should rephrase it and say art that feeds your soul, even if it's not necessarily the kind of art that you make. I'm not a filmmaker, but I love films. And I think that the more we surround ourselves with that, the better off and the more inspired we're going to be. So I hopefully
I'm with you
that
there.
answers a little bit of the question.
When I lecture my students at Seton Hall University, I always talk about the cross-pollination of the arts and how visual art has always affected musical art from the Impressionistic period to all of the great composers were surrounded by an artistic community, music being like an amber that traps and everything around it. So you have to be experiencing art while you're at that. It's a wonderful answer, and we appreciate that. Inside.
Well, and before you move on, I'll tag on something a little more specific and practical to that, and that is that I really am a choral composer. Books, they're arrangements of songs that are already pre-existent, and I know the words to the songs if it's a book of Christmas carols or something like that. I am so because of that. I have to say that I'm probably, if Eve asked me to say what are you most inspired by, it's words, it's texts, and every one of my pieces obviously in choral music have had their genesis in someone sending me a text that I really resonate with, that really, hate to sound cheesy, but a text that sings
Ah.
to me. And I spend a lot of time going through those poetry books above there, copious, really, amounts of hours. I hear music, Bradnick sponsored by Velveeta. But it really is true. I'm not a lyricist myself, but I love lyrics and I love text. And when I find that, it just kind of almost brings forth the music.
We have a question from Daniel from Delaware. How did the piece that was played in the opening, how did that come about? Tell us about your creation of that work. And were the words submitted to you? Tell us the genesis of that work.
Well, and this is Daniel? Is
Daniel
that correct,
from
Jason?
Delaware.
Okay, Daniel, with that particular piece, I really love that style of writing. I love Eric Whitacre. Obviously you can hear Eric in that piece, and
Diatonic chordal clusters.
Absolutely. Eric came out. Oh, he's had Water Night and Luke Surumque and so many wonderful pieces that people know that are really now iconic. And you love it. I absolutely love that kind of writing. And so the lyricist for that piece is a lady that lives here in Texas. Her name is Pamela Stewart. And I had expressed to her, gosh, Pam, do you have any text? I co-write with her often. And it was really me coming to her and saying, this is kind of the piece that I would like to write. I'd love to branch out and experiment a little bit and just see what I can come up with here. Do you have anything that might lend itself well to that? And if I remember our conversation correctly, she said, well, no, I don't, but I'll start to work on something. And so she did. She came up with painstakingly crafted these wonderful lyrics, which she translated, into Latin and then sent the text to me. And you can find that link to that piece on YouTube, and you can go and kind of pause on the score play there where you can see the text that's there. I don't have it all in front of me, and I'd make an idiot of myself if I tried to remember it. But Pam wrote it in such a way that the text is cylindrical, I guess, or cyclical. That's the word I'm looking for, not cylinder, but cyclical. It moves in a cycle. And the translation of the text, it starts with, darkness, stillness, and then it moves through a few phrases which describe what's happening here on this. There's the light, the Luke's section, and then what happens in the last stanza of the music is that it happens, the words come back again that opened it, but they come back oppositely, right? It's cyclical. And so the challenge there was to create music that almost like box crab cannons, remember those kind of things, that work moving forward to the middle section, and then the middle section happens, but then it kind of works moving itself backwards out of it. And so the piece ends, and finally ends, coming back to that C sharp, which opens the piece. I'm probably making a mess trying to explain that, but that was the deal. We decided we might try to create something like this, and then my music had to follow the structure that Pam had set forth in her
So
lyric.
who are some of your inspirations for some choral inspirations? You mentioned text painting from the Renaissance. So give us some of your musical inspirations that mix together and make that are in the back of your mind.
Well, again, so much of what I listen to is orchestral. Brahms and Mahler and Brahms are kind of my guys. But in the choral world, of course I have folks that I look up to. I love. I'll talk about more classical choral composers first, and then I'd like to maybe mention a few names just in our world of church sacred music. I certainly love Morton Lauridsen. I love Eric Whitacre. A relatively new guy on the scene now, but he's not really that new. He's been around for a while, but his name is Paul Meeler. And I don't know if I know of any composer that just kind of takes me to the sublime like the music of Paul Mueller does. I really don't know how to describe it more than that. John Rutter, of course, is a favorite. I mean, what composer wouldn't love to be able to write a melody like John Rutter writes? And I'm fortunate in the little subculture of the musical world that we live in to be inspired by a lot of composers whom I know and work with, folks like Joseph Martin, folks like Craig Courtney. I'm a huge fan of Craig Courtney, Dan Forrest, Elaine Hagenberg, Lloyd Larson. I mean, there are just so many names out there. I hate to even start naming names because then you obviously forget important ones. But all of the folks that do what we do.
I've been very fortunate to meet some of these people and to have them come to Ocean Grove and in my summer festival. That's
Sure.
where I met Joseph Martin and yourself. And I met both of you through a mutual colleague of ours, a librettist and a reverend. This is Reverend Ronald Cadmus. So Reverend Ronald put us together and he introduced us, but he did the same with Joseph Martin. And it's been a delightful, we want to thank Reverend Ronald Cadmus and thank him for putting us together because we've brought such interesting artists to our community at Ocean Grove, and it's thank you so much to Ronald. And now you and Ronald wrote a piece together that was supposed to be premiered on our 66th annual Ocean Grove Choir Festival, which is an event that is usually have a choir of between 500 to 700 singers every year and an audience of 2,000 to 3,000 people, and it's always an event that we all look forward to, and people come from miles around. And this year will not be held live, but we're looking at some exciting options on premiering one of your works that you worked on together. So tell me about that piece.
Well, the piece is called God is With Us. And Ron sent me the text for this. Boy, Jason, I guess, at least 6 months ago, probably more. We're probably looking at even in the summer that Ron sent this text to me last summer. And I think it's kind of unique in how, again, providence God kind of orchestrates things, because the text is God is with us. We don't need to be afraid. And, when I sat to write that, whenever I did finally start writing it, I think it was in the fall of last year, really had no idea how much Ron's text really speaks to our current situation. And so when I got the text, God is with us. We hear that in the Psalms. We see it in Scripture all over the place. And, we're Christians. We claim Christ as our Savior. I claim Christ. And there's confidence in that. There's assurance in that. When we say God is with us, it isn't kind of a wishy-washy, maybe if we play our cards right, he'll come through for us, or okay, we're down to the last seconds of the game, let's throw a Hail Mary and see what happens and see if God saves us. It's not that at all, right? I mean, it's an assurance. God is with us. He's been with us. He's going to be with us. He's with us. And so mainly what I wanted to do with Ron's text is just to drench really every measure with confidence. And not confidence in ourselves, confidence in God. And it's a simple theme in some ways. It's probably I won't play it on the piano because sounds kind of distort through the camera speakers. But it's one of the simplest themes I've ever written. Just a couple of notes in D minor, but I wanted it to be a theme that folks can latch onto and sing with assurance and authority.
Well, we can't wait. We start rehearsing it on Tuesday in our Zoom rehearsal. We had 55 people on the first Zoom call, and I think that's going to grow. And I had to discover how many singers we can have on a Zoom call, and that's a new problem for me. But I think we can go up to 100 before I have to order the extended package to 500. So
awesome.
Hopefully that'll be the case. And as we bring a new piece of music to life in a unique and challenging time, but it's with a message that we need so much today.
Sure. Right. Absolutely.
Let's switch gears. Now, you're also very busy in the publishing world. What is the role of a publisher for people in the audience who may not know what a publisher in a large music company does?
Sure. Well, I have been involved in the publishing world for about 6 years now. When I finished up, or not when I finished up teaching, but when I made the decision to move from teaching at Sterling College into publishing, I spent a year kind of doing double duty, working both at the college and also in the publishing world. And my wife basically said, "Look, you're going to have to pick one or the other because we never see you." And so my heart was in the industry, and then that's where I went. Um, the the publishing world, we have publishers, we have distributors, we have all sorts of different entities that and retailers that kind of come together to make the whole thing work, and they all work in tandem to one another. I worked for the last 6 years with a wonderful company called Hal Leonard, and it's been wonderful being with them. Hal Leonard is full of wonderful folks. They treat their employees well. They treat their composers well. They treat the music that they publish well. It's been a pleasure working with them. Toward the end of the summer, I'm so excited to be starting an employment with Lorenz as one of their choral editors, and I can't wait to work with the folks there that I've known and loved for many years. In both of these situations, Hal Leonard, their primary is to publish music. Okay, they publish music, and that I know is simple and the obvious answer, but that's what they do. They do sell music. People do buy direct from Hal Leonard, but typically we're set up, at least in this country, that we don't buy from the publishing companies themselves, but we buy from distributors, right? That J.W. Pepper, of course, being an example of a distributor, and there are many others in the country. And so that's a little bit of how that world works. My job at Hal Leonard and at Lorenz, as I take up the reins there later on in the summer, has been to edit, and that involves everything you might imagine that editing would involve. There's helping identify little pieces and problems that, hey, we really like this piece and we think it's going to be a go and we want to put it out, but there's some issues here. So it's working with the composer to try to find musical solutions to get the piece ready for prime time. It involves that. It involves everything from helping produce recordings, which is just an absolute blast, getting to be in the studio. It involves audio proofing those recordings. I've had the great pleasure for the last 6 years to proof both the music and the audio of every Joseph Martin cantata that's come out in the last 6 years. And of course, when you audio proof that, you have to imagine what you're proofing. You're proofing the orchestration just alone for churches that might want to sing against the orchestration. You're proofing the listening CD for people that want to demo it. We do something in the industry that we call highlighting, right? Studio tracks. We'll have a CD for a soprano where that part is, highlighted, and then alto. So you have to listen to all four. By the time you listen to a piece of music, you've heard whatever you're listening to about 45 times, and then through that, it's time to start proofing the product. You've edited it and got it ready, and now then it's back from the engraver, and you have to kind of put your intellectual, is this dynamic so many FPUs away from the staff or whatever, and so that's been it, and I love it. I love doing that, and I'm excited to have an opportunity to continue doing that with Lorenz. I'll tell you something neat. I'm not a full-time composer because I have this editorial position, and then in addition to that, and it creates a nice season for me, for lack of a better word. I enjoy using both sides of my brain. I think that if I truly were a full-time composer, and I know a few of them that are very successful, all they do day in and day out is compose. I think that if that were me, it would take about 3 or 4 Brad Nix pieces, and I would say to myself, I am so sick of me, and I got nothing else to write. And about that time in our publishing year is when I start editing other people's music, and I turn on that part of my brain. And then by the time I think, my gosh, I just can't proof another piece. I can't help anyone else. I need to write something for me. That season kind of comes back around again. And so it really is a wonderful opportunity for someone like me to really engage both sides of my brain, and the creative part and also this analytical part that editing also entails.
I'm with you there. This is one of those things where, we cross pollinate ourselves. We do different things, and it fires up. One activity fires up the other and gives us inspiration in different ways. We get to interact with great people, and it's that synchronicity which keeps music fresh for all of us.
Absolutely wonderful. Yeah.
Now, if you had to divide your time, what percentage is the publishing? What percentage does the composition take? If you had to guess, how would you categorize that in your life?
Boy, that is hard to guess. I teach people, and in fact, if anyone ever watches this podcast, and they were in my my lecture a few days ago, I encourage and teach people to continue writing every day, even if you don't feel like it. And I try to do that myself. I think Z. Randall Stroop, wonderful choral composer, said once, I think I read it in a book, that creativity is not like a spigot that you can just turn on and off. You have to exercise it every day to keep it going. However, that is what perfection would look like. The reality is that I go through times where I don't write anything for weeks, or maybe even a month or two or more. I wish it wasn't the case. I tend to go through spurts where I write a lot and then I don't write at all. Because of not because I don't want to or because I don't have the ideas to, just simply because other work takes its place. And so if I had to give you a percentage, I would say, Jason, that probably 60 to 70% of my time is working in the publishing industry. And that involves more than even what I've mentioned already. There's traveling for folks and doing reading sessions and things like that. 60 to 70%. I would say there's probably 20% of my time that I work at the church, lest you think that I'm a bad worker at the church. I'm part-time there, and I probably spend 20%, maybe 30% of my week there involved in worship planning and rehearsals. And then honestly, probably about 10% is what I compose. I'm a weekend warrior. I go at it on the weekends. I get up early and work when I'm writing. I do have those occasional times where the publishing industry kind of hits a lag, or church music hits a lag. We're all in church music. We all always say that there's only two seasons: preparing for Christmas or recovering from Christmas. And a lot of times the weeks after Christmas tend to be a little bit easier to get some writing time in. So there are weeks where that writing percentage bumps up considerably. But on a typical week, it's not really a whole lot there. So I wish it were different, but I would imagine most composers probably have the same.
And you have to factor in
issues.
also that you mentioned that you have a family. Tell us about what does your family life look like?
I am blessed with a wife, Patty, and I have three daughters: Kylie, who is 15, and Sarah, who recently turned 12, and then Anna, who turned 6, and just this past, just a little while ago. I often joke, people ask me, what is it like being in a house there with all these, females? And I often joke that this is God's funny way of answering the prayer that I prayed all through high school, to be surrounded by women. And I'm not quite sure if I necessarily had in mind the 15, 12, and 6-year-old variety, but they are the absolute love of my life. And I tell you what, I'm proud of us as a family, because like everyone in this country, we have spent the last 3 months within the walls of this house. And we've had some tense moments and, sisters that need a little break away from one another. But you know what? For the most part, we've done pretty well. Now, they're ready for it to be over. But at this point, I can say that no one has killed anyone yet. And we've all cohabitated somewhat peacefully.
I can relate to you. I've got 4 children. I've got a 20-year-old, twin 17-year-old girls, and a 15-year-old boy. So we've used a lot of strategies, including forming a podcast, as to occupy our time and to kind of get out our creative juices while I was supposed to be traveling and doing a lot of music, and 17 concerts were canceled, and here we are. Family is an amazing thing.
Yes.
I have a question from Reverend Grace in Florida, who asks, how does a composer send a piece to a publisher for consideration? And can you describe that process?
Sure, absolutely I can. First, you need to make sure that the publisher that you're dealing with, Grace, accepts non-solicited manuscripts. There are some publishers out there that do not. They have a stable of staff writers that they rely upon, and you might send them something, and they might be kind enough to let you know, hey, we don't accept non-solicited manuscripts. Thank you for considering us, but here's your manuscript back. Or they might not, in which case you might just be indefinitely waiting on an answer that's never going to come. So the first thing that you need to do is to check out the publisher that you're interested in submitting something to and make sure that they do, in fact, take unsolicited manuscripts. Many do, but many do not. The other thing that you need to make sure of is that the publisher that you're thinking about submitting something to, make sure that they publish and are interested in the style of music that you are, in fact, wanting to submit. My good friend and former boss when I was at Hal Leonard and best friend Joe Martin always says that, it doesn't matter if you've got a hamburger made with the finest beef in the world, you're not going to sell that thing to a vegetarian. And so it really doesn't matter how great your piece is. It could be, a masterwork, but if you're submitting it to a company that is not interested in that type of music, they're going to turn it away. So those preliminaries have to be established. And then when you find a company that you feel like could be a home for your creative work, then send it there. We had to do it at one time through snail mail. Nowadays, they're happy to submit or receive, rather, submissions electronically through email. And then once the publisher receives your submission, it will go through a length of time. It honestly, depending on how many submissions the publisher receives, it could sit for a week. It could sit for 6 months. I know when I was at Hal Leonard, we asked people to give us 6 months to cipher through the submissions, because publishers receive so many. They receive hundreds in a week, and they want to make sure that everyone's submission receives due process and a fair consideration. And so it's a lengthy process, and depending on the review schedule of whatever publishing house that you meet with, sooner or later a review team made up of the editors of that company will sit and they'll go through everything. And then they'll decide what to publish. If they want to publish your piece, you'll receive the congratulation letter. You'll receive the good news letter. If they decide not to publish your piece, hopefully you'll receive one of those letters too. You can't always expect that when you receive a thanks but no thanks letter, that you'll know why your piece has been rejected. It would be wonderful if publishers always provided that, but again, they send out so many notes and they're incubated with so many submissions that they're not always able to do that. So there's a good chance if your piece is rejected, you might not ever know why. And that leads some folks into despair in it, and it really shouldn't, because a lot of pieces aren't rejected because they're not a good piece. We take our rejections personally. Oh, they turned my piece away. It must be an awful piece. Well, it could be. That is a possibility. But there's a gazillion other reasons why they might have turned a piece away as well. Maybe you submitted a ballad in 4/4 in F major, and they've already accepted for a certain release 5 other ballads in 4/4 in F major. They just don't have room for another one. Maybe you're sending in something that is a text dealing with the Beatitudes, and they recently have accepted a piece and put out that deal with the Beatitudes, and they don't want to bring those pieces into competition with one another. So there's a lot of different reasons behind the scenes that you may or may not know if a piece is rejected. I will tell you, and I know, Jason, you're not asking for all this, but I'm kind of talking
much
with Grace
appreciated.
here.
This is much appreciated.
Maybe more than she wants to know. But you have to be ready for many rejection letters. I received a ton of rejection letters before I received my first yes letter. And that just goes with the territory. So you have to believe in yourself and not be downtrodden or downcast if the first couple of times or the first many time times that you submit something that you don't have a hit
Brad, can I ask a
with a
question?
publisher.
How many does it change? I'm not sure. These are questions I'm sure a lot of people, including myself, don't know. Especially the singers, the choral singers who are on the call, may not know. How many releases does a company like Hal Leonard or Lawrence produce a year? Is there a limit to the number they release total?
Sure. Well, again, I'm moving from Hal Leonard and moving into Lorenz in September. Not being with Lorenz yet, I can't quite speak to their process since I'm not yet, privy to. Haven't been in a meeting with. Looking forward to that happening in August. But I can speak with what we did prior COVID. COVID has kind of made everything up in the air. But
Hold
during
that
my
thought. We'll talk about that soon.
Yeah, okay. During my time with Hal Leonard prior to COVID, we put out two releases per year. A fall release, which basically comes out and is out now in the summertime, and it comes out hopefully in early summer because all the reading sessions and all the choir directors are all buying their music for fall and Christmas and Thanksgiving right now in a typical year. And then, as soon as the other release that would come out, at least for Hal Leonard, and again, I've now been outside of their meetings for a bit, so I'm not sure what their plans are for the future. But prior to COVID, the other release that we would have would be a spring release, which would come out in January, and there would be some marketing for those pieces in January and February, getting ready for the Easter season. So, I think most publishers fall in line with that. I'm trying to think about Fred Bach. I don't want to say something that's not true. I don't know. I want to say that they only release once a year, but I could absolutely be wrong with that. A quick check on their website would
Thank you
clear
for
that
that
up.
glimpse behind
I
the
think
curtain of the publishing industry, because I know many of we have some choir directors on this call, because I'm getting questions from these choir directors. I think it's really interesting
yeah,
to see how this side of the business works. I get all these catalogs in the mail, so I appreciate this.
right, absolutely, absolutely. I think most folks probably do two releases. There might be a few out there that do
One
one.
more question. Someone else asks, can anyone send you personally a text?
Absolutely, absolutely. People do that all the time. And I am more than happy to see whatever text that comes your way, I or comes my way. Here in a few months, I will have an email set up at bnix@lorenz.com, bnix at lorenz.com. That's not set up yet. Through the summer, feel free to reach me. I know a lot of composers might not want to give their email out, but I don't mind. You can reach me at bnixcomposer, bnixcomposer at gmail.com. And absolutely, send me something. I would, of course, be honored to take a
And
look
if you
at.
had to guess, how many in your past companies, how many in those bi-yearly releases, how many anthems are in each of those guides, if you had to take a rounded guess?
Well, again, I speak just from my experience at Hal Leonard, but I think most publishing companies, fall into this. And I don't know. Again, we'll talk later on about the future of publishing, but most publishers will have a larger fall release. By the way, we call these the word we use in the industry is crop, CROP. So if you hear me say crop and you think, what in the world is he talking about? I mean the release. And most folks will have a larger fall release. Some companies like Beck and Horst, if you were to talk to Dan or Craig or get one of their brochures, they probably put out. Boy, again, I'm hesitant to speak for them, but Hal Leonard typically in the past, in my involvement with them at least, would put out probably around 50 or 60 for the fall, a little bit less than that for the spring. I think that Lorenz probably is in that same boat. So I think those are ballpark numbers that most
Sure.
publishers circle around. So
Well, thank you for these. This is an interesting look. Let's take a look now. Let's take a look. We talked about the industry pre-COVID. Let's talk about the effects of COVID specifically on the publishing industry. And who better to ask than yourself? So tell us a little bit about what you see right now. What's going on right now for people like yourself?
well, boy, just know it's nice to to be optimist, and I am an optimist, and I do believe that God has the answer for this. I'm not sure when He's going to reveal it, but some days I feel more faithful and confident than other days. But right now, it's scorched earth. It's really not good news at all. You know, and again, I'm not speaking with any authoritative information. I'm no longer with Hal Leonard. I'm not with Lorenz yet. And so I have no information for any companies, but from any companies. But it goes without saying that when churches are not meeting, and choirs are not meeting, and school choirs are not meeting, and bands are not meeting, and orchestras are not meeting, if you're in the business of providing music for all of those entities, the money's not coming in, and you don't have to be a rocket scientist to see that. So publishers right now are just kind of sitting back, I think, thinking, boy, I sure hope this ends soon where we can get through this without too much damage.
You're the first. You're the first composer slash publisher we've had, and I've had two opera singers on so far, a concert pianist, and a Holocaust survivor, and a musicologist. And just so far, the story is the same for us all. So it's interesting to hear it come from your business. How, and me as a conductor, it's just interesting to hear how we're all in the same boat together, and that we're going to figure this out together.
That's right, and we will. We absolutely will. For those of us that are in the publishing industry, and you know what, I don't want to just make it exclusive to the publishing industry. I'd like to include anyone that makes their living from the performance of, or the teaching of, or the publication of live music. I was talking with Joe Martin yesterday, and we both said, the airline industry is hurt by this, the hotel industry, but it almost seems like people that are involved in live music making have almost disproportionately been hurt by the pandemic. Because we don't know when choral music is going to return. We don't know when orchestra music is going to return. We just don't know. We hope it's soon, but we don't know. And those of us that make our living from this, I'm in a spot right now, and I know, Jason, you are as well, and I think most people that hear this podcast can relate to this. I'm a choir director. I'm in the business of publishing music. And the very last thing I want to do is to encourage people to get together and sing and folks get sick. We don't. At the same time, my livelihood depends on the existence of choirs and live music making. And I wish the most honest answer I can tell you, Jason, is I don't got an answer. I just don't know right now what's going to happen. I know that sooner or later we will get through this. Like I said, it's just how can we have damage control in the publishing industry until we do. I know that a lot of publishers are looking at publishing solo music right now for solo voices, and that's admirable, and it provides a need. The sales from that are probably not going to be very significant, but it is a way for publishers to stay relevant. To stay involved, and those of us that are in the sacred industry, lest you think that we're just in it trying to make money. That is not true. The sacred music industry is an industry, and we do have to keep the doors open. But we are also very much a ministry. And so not only are we sitting back thinking, well, okay, how can we have enough business to keep the doors open? But there is also a great part of us that are thinking, how can we minister to folks? How can we provide a product out there that is relevant for them, that can meet needs that are there? And so a lot of publishers I know are brainstorming ideas for that to happen. In the choral world itself, I think that I'm seeing a lot of folks, at least on my Facebook page and others, that are saying, okay. And by the way, I know that the information is coming out. Some of it is bad. Some of it is, well, wait a minute, maybe it's not so bad. Maybe singing is okay. There's just a lot of, we're not sure yet. And so I think a lot of choir directors are moving tentatively towards singing again. But one of the ways that they're doing that, I know a lot of my friends are holding choral rehearsals, but not necessarily saying, okay, we're going to get in the choir loft together and perform now. That they're holding off on, but they are purchasing music and they're looking forward to fall and looking forward to Christmas, and they're holding rehearsals in their sanctuary maybe, or outside, where folks can. The weather's nice right now, where folks can kind of, you know, uh, uh, rehearse and not be feel a little bit better about it. The other thing that I will throw out there that, and I'm sorry to take this conversation and run with it, but the other thing that honestly I do think we need to look towards is the idea of risk assessment. Uh, I hope that a vaccine for COVID-19 comes very soon. I hope we have it. I hear some folks that news outlets that say it's going to happen by the end of this year. Some are saying it's going to happen by the start of next year. My wife and I were talking about that the other day. That's the optimal solution, and I hope it happens. But the fact is, what if a vaccine for COVID never happens, and we might not ever get one? Well, that obviously doesn't mean that singing is going to stop. At least I hope it doesn't mean that. As a Christian, I believe what the Bible says, that if we stop singing, the very rocks are going to cry out. And so that means then that we have to move the conversation into risk assessment. How do we rehearse and provide music and music outlets for people in the safest way possible? How do we let them know that here are the risks that are involved? And if you think about it, Jason, if you really think about it, that's the way we live our whole lives. I can hop on 35 and travel up from my home here in Southeast Austin to North Austin, and I'm taking a tremendous risk. If you've ever been on 35,
never been to Texas yet.
Austin, Dallas. Well, come on down. I'll take Whataburger. Whataburger's my favorite place. Yeah, if you hop on a plane, I fly frequently, and I do it because I know the risks. I know that if a plane goes down, it's bad news. But I also know that 900,000, and 999,999 times out of a million, the plane goes down, it lands or takes off and lands the way it's supposed to. Well, that analogy doesn't quite carry over because our risks with COVID are a greater percentage than going up in a plane, and I realize that. But I guess my overall point is that we also, in addition to the cure, I think our medical community and our choral community needs to start very cautiously entering into the conversation of risk assessment and what are we willing to do, knowing the risks that are involved.
We're all in this uncharted waters together. As a scholar and as an artist myself, I was grappling with these thoughts, and as we all are, and as I'm canceling seasons and rebooking ideas and like concerts, I spent 2 years preparing and projects in New York City. I produced a lot of concerts. These all evaporated. I did a lot of research and just kind of researched music. How did humanity come back from the most significant catastrophes in the past? And we had a show yesterday with a Holocaust survivor who survived 3 concentration camps, and then after the war missed her entire high school career and then went in to study musicology in Poland. She was on the call, and we had a musicologist talk about the Black Death and how humanity recovered after some of those episodes. And what we see is creative people come up with creative solutions. It's just in our DNA. And while we're in it right now, we can't see that. We can't see the long scope of things. That things will come back to normal. Well, not normal, but things will reset, and creative people will be there to do that.
I believe that. I have to believe that. I have to absolutely believe that there is a light at the end of this tunnel, and that we will get there. As a Christian, I have to believe that there are better days ahead. And you are exactly right. The creative community, we see these virtual choirs. This past week, I taught. I mentioned this earlier. I taught in something called the Composers Symposium, which is sponsored by Joseph Martin. It's put on by his company, the Martin Creative Services. Typically, this conference is held every year in Atlanta. I was an attendee at the conference for many years. That's one of the ways that kind of got me steered over into writing. And for the last several years, I've been a faculty there. Well, we couldn't meet in Atlanta this year, and so we did it online, did it through Zoom. And it was remarkable. I've spent this whole week giving composition lessons to folks online. We've spent this week talking a lot about choral music in the industry and the conversation that you and I are having right now. We were able to have master classes. In other words, folks that participated in this conference they sent us a finale file or a PDF, and then they sent an MP3 of the piece being performed, and we were able to get this out to all 50 of the participants that were there, and the clinicians that were there were able to comment. I was able to give lectures on
I think it's amazing how technology is trying to fill in those gaps. It's not perfect. It's certainly not seamless.
That's exactly right. And there are companies. Again, I've been involved. I speak about Joe because I've been involved with his enterprises personally, but he has had me as a guest, much like what you're doing with Music Matters, with this very thing. He's had me as a guest on something that he does called Worship Songs Online. And any of us that are involved with choir, whether we're directors or singers, we know that the ministry of choir is not just performance oriented. Now, we love that. We live to perform in front of people, and we long to share the message that choir music can bring like no other. But at the same time, we know that a lot of the ministry of choral music is the fellowship of the choir itself and being together. And while it's not safe right now for folks to necessarily be in the same room and hug each other and shake hands, it's been heartening to see the choral community and folks like you and all, even if it's virtually, that we can all be together and still retain some sense of community.
If you had told me 3 months ago that I would be doing every night making virtual choir recordings, I would have told you you're crazy. Right. I was too busy preparing symphonic concerts and opera concerts and my university choir schedule and. I know. And here we are, and at Ocean Grove, which has a large choral community, we're doing, in the summer season, we're doing a whole season of weekly broadcast virtual choir, and we're opening it up to anyone who wants to submit. And we just had our first one last weekend on Sunday, and we had 54 singers submit tracks from all across the country. And we had people from California, Florida, Illinois, Midwest, right. And then we had Australia and India. I don't even know how they got our information, but that's the nature of the internet. That's the nature of today. And then we put a choir on the screen, and that was part of our virtual worship service. And we were together in a unique way. I made the guide tracks. It takes twice as long as a normal rehearsal would, and I'm sitting in my my suit and a pair of shorts, but it's an odd time.
Don't stand up. Right. I mean, Jason, there you go. And the choral, while we're kind of going through this dark tunnel, that's how our community and our what we love, choral music, that's how it's going to survive and how it will survive by people together, by forward-looking, people that think outside of the box like yourself, by publishers that are doing that same thing. I mean, that's how we're all going to get through this. And I tell you what, I hasten to throw this out there too, that I think that when we do get through this, whenever it is, and I certainly hope it's sooner rather than later, but when we do get through this, I believe we're going to see a resurgence in the choral art like we've never seen before. I believe that people that have always been involved with choirs are going to come back to choirs with a vengeance and with a commitment and with a thankfulness and a gratefulness and an excitement that we've never seen before. But I also think this. I really do believe that people that have never sung in a choir are going to long for it. And I think that we're going to find our church choirs when we come back, the people that have sat in the pews and have thought before, maybe I should join the choir. Nah, I'm not going to do it today. They're going to want to do that. People that have sat at and been to community choral concerts are going to want to do that. Here's the magic of choral singing, and I love, like I said, so much of my music I listen to is orchestral anyway. But a person can't roll out of bed in the morning and decide that they want to learn to play the violin and go and join an orchestra. They could. They could, but I don't know if they're going to pass that audition or not. What's the E string? Uh, but you know what? All of us that have a voice and have the ability to carry a tune, and you know what? Even if you don't carry a tune, we all have this capacity for choral singing. I'm an awful singer. I lead worship at my church, but I am smart enough to bring people around me that do what I can't do, drive long distances to get away from hearing me sing. But you know what? I have a place in a choir. And not only have we been sitting at home, but our country, our world, our country, we've been quarantined. We've been away from one another. And people want community with one another. And I just believe that they're going to find that making music together. And so whenever this is done, I actually believe not only will our choral community be back, but I think you're going to see a lot of converts to our choral community that are just wanting to be together. And choir seems like an awfully nice outlet to make that happen.
The idea of community is the essence of choral music. It's why we come together, and it's everything. And thank you so much for your absolutely wonderful words, and continued success and blessings with your family and your career.
Well, it has been a pleasure to be here and to talk with you, Jason. Really appreciate this opportunity.
And we'll make sure to mention I've got Joe Martin coming on our show on July 7th. We have Joseph Martin on our show, so we'll be sure to give you a shout out when we're on there.
Well, I tell you what, Joe likes nothing more. He's my best friend, but he likes nothing more than throwing me under the bus. So you be sure not to let him do that, because I've been complimentary of him today. I don't know if he's been watching. Joe, if you're watching, I want you to hear all the nice things I've said, and I'll be listening.
Brad, thank you so much for taking the time today, and I look forward to making your anthem come alive this summer. In one way or another, it's going to come alive. And
absolutely.
I look forward to be in touch with you, and once you're on the show, you're a friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you for having me. This has been a blast.
Thank you for watching Music Matters 2020 with me, your host, Jason Tramm. We want to say be sure that you subscribe to us right on the YouTube channel, and hit that bell to get the most current information on upcoming guests and topics. Be like us on Facebook, and consider becoming a Patreon member. Patreon members are a way to support artists and communities that you like, even in these difficult times. With all artists having such catastrophic losses in career and scale, think about this as a way to support the artists in this show in particular. Anyone who decides to do that will get a t-shirt, Music Matters. So thank you so much. And remember, everyone, keep music alive. Thank you.